Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar at the New York Botanical Garden. My name is Michael Balick. I'm Vice President and Director of the Institute of Economic Botany at the Garden. It is my pleasure to welcome you for today's presentation, Human Beings, Baobabs, and Tamarins, an Evolutionary Complex. At any time during today's event, you are welcome to submit questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your window, and we will gather these for our speaker to answer at the end of the presentation. Just a note, please don't put questions in the chat function because this won't be monitored. Stick to the Q&A function, please. Live captions can be enabled by clicking the CC button, then show subtitles or view full transcripts. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be available at the NYBG Lecture Library. John Rashford graduated from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York in 1982 with a PhD in anthropology and a research interest in ethnobotany. He began his teaching at the College of Charleston in 1983 and retired as Professor Emeritus in 2018. He has been an active member of the Society of Economic Botany for most of his academic career and was awarded its highest honor, Distinguished Economic Botanist, in 2019. He is currently a Science Board member of the National Tropical Botanical Garden. His research interests have included trees and culture in the Caribbean and Brazil, including the Ackee, Blahia sapida, Ficus and Ceiba, the ethnobotany of the baobab in the Americas, and the baobab culture of the Hadza people of Tanzania. In 2013, Dr. Rashford and his colleague Robert Vokes co-edited the widely acclaimed volume, African Ethnobotany in the Americas, the first in-depth study of ethnobotanical knowledge and skills among the African diaspora in the Americas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Rashford.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Mike. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I would like to start by thanking Dr. Balick for that wonderful introduction and for the invitation to be part of the seminar this morning. I was especially glad to be able to speak on a topic I find of curious interest, the possibility of an evolutionary mimetic complex involving human beings and baobab and tamarin trees. Baobab and tamarin are well-known fruit and medicinal trees of the African savanna complex that were introduced to India beginning some 5,000 years ago. The long history of African participation in the Indian Ocean trade is documented in the earliest historical accounts of the region, and there's growing interest in the African contribution to the spread of plants such as the baobab and tamarin to territories of the Caribbean and to the New World generally. My presentation this morning attempts to explain why these quite different trees are called tamarins in India and the Caribbean. The explanation I'm going to pursue by presenting you with some slides that I've taken over the years. But I'd like to start by raising this question. Just by looking at two trees without knowing anything about them, it would be impossible to say why they should share the same name. So here we have on the left the tamarin, and on the right, the baobab tree. You can see they're quite different in appearance. And I should say that both of these trees are in Barbados. There are a few slides that are not my own, and I'll let you know when I show those, but these are in Barbados. You can see they look nothing alike in their leaves. Nothing alike in their flowers. The tamarind flowers in the day. The baobab is nocturnal. It flowers at night, pollinated by bats. And they look nothing alike in their fruits. But later on, I'm going to argue that they are in fact alike in their fruits. They're both indehiscent fruit pods that disperse their seeds by food bribe. Now, there are many kinds of plants that are called tamarinds in the Caribbean. And some of them like, leucaena and albicea and pithecolobium and even Delinix, the flamboyant, are called tamarind in various parts of the region. And in some ways, these are what I call look-alike tamarinds because they do share a common ancestor with the tamarind. But the same can't be said for the baobab. It has no resemblance to tamarind except for the taste. And in this sense, it's not a look-alike tamarind, but a taste-alike tamarind. This tree, the baobab is widespread in Africa. I'm giving a brief introduction because I don't know with a virtual audience, I don't want to leave anyone out, but it's important to know that this tree is found throughout Africa in appropriate environments. So as you move, for example, from the Sudan over to the Nuba Mountains, Darfur, over to West Africa, and down to Southern Africa, the Zambezi Valley, and in Eastern Africa, and along the coast. This is in Senegal, and here you see the tree used for its foliage, a widespread practice in West Africa. Now, before I continue with the slides, I do want to emphasize the points of correlations that are important for the argument I'm making. And I'm going to take a moment just to say a brief word about each one before continuing with the slides, because in my slide presentation, I would like to give you a sense of how I came to this topic and why it struck me as significant. The first is that the baobab and tamarind are routinely reported as growing not only in the same environment, but also side by side and often entwined. This intertwining is the reason I began my own research when I discovered baobabs and tamarinds growing together in the Caribbean. Across India and across the Caribbean, the baobab is most widely known by vernacular binomial names that identify it as being a kind of tamarind. This cannot be a chance, a lightness, or a confusion, as some people have tried to explain. Baobabs and tamarinds are also entwined in the thinking of scholars with respect to their values as food trees, their potential for improving local diets, their contribution to the economic and social development of local communities. And I might also add their dual symbolic significance, baobabs being associated with women and tamarinds being associated with men. Fourth, the overlapping seasonal flowering and complementary seasonal fruit ripening is important in terms of human use, and I will say a little bit more about that. They have similar indehiscent fruits and food bribe dispersal, as I mentioned, and human beings are the shared specialized dispersal agent for both trees. Now, let me move ahead and illustrate some of these points. My interest in this subject really began in Antigua. I went there to visit, to attend the Caribbean Food Crop Society. And while I was there, I was visiting with family. You can see here is Antigua in the northern part of the Eastern Caribbean. And I was in the small town of Param. And I had gone there to look at cotton trees because from childhood, I was always curious as to why this tree had such significance to people in the Caribbean. And I published an early article on the spiritual significance of cotton trees in the Caribbean. But it was while looking at cotton trees, I asked my cousin, after she volunteered, to show me some of the beautiful cotton trees of Antigua. And the first tree she took me to was this tree in Param. And in fact, it turned out to be a baobab tree. Now, the only reason I recognize it is I had seen the trees on my travels in Africa, and I can't say it interested me at that time. It wasn't really until I began encountering them in the Caribbean that it piqued my interest. But you can see it's something of a central place tree. And if you look, you can see the broken wall around it. I had gone behind the, I went and knocked on the door of this lady who lived next door to the tree, solely with the intention of asking her if I could take a picture of the other side of it. And she said yes. And while talking to her, I said, you know, it's amazing that you allow the tree to grow and it's destroying your cut stone cement wall. And she said, oh, the tree was important. Now, this was at the beginning of my study, so I can't say that I had a lot of questions for her. I didn't even take the time to ask her why it was important, but it clearly was important to her. And she, as you can see, this was what it was like when I first saw it. This was behind the house. And several years later, I went back. She, of course, had passed away. The wall was gone, but the tree was still there. And there is a story in that. Large baobabs in the Americas seem to exist because people everywhere are protecting them. And they're doing it with an extreme amount of enthusiasm, I might add. And that was a bit of a surprise to me when I began. This tree in Param in Antigua, it aborts its fruit before they're fully matured, so there's nothing to eat. And because of this, the children call it a dolly tree. And you can see they turn the staminal tube, it's hollow, upside down, and the staminal ball looks like here. Now, in Param, I didn't know what to ask, but I recorded all the information I could from the people that were around. And I thought it was interesting that they call the tree the dolly tree. But in Jamaica, the tree is called monkey tamarind. And in the Jamaican context, monkey simply means imitative of the real tamarind. And this was the most famous baobab in Jamaica. It grew at Alpha School in Kingston, in the girls' portion of the school. And it was at the center of the school, as you can see from the benches set around it. It was where the watchman spent his time. Whenever I went visit him, I always found him there, and also where students studied. And you know, you can see scaffolding, they had their plays and all kinds of activities associated with the tree. But it wasn't until I saw tamarind trees at the base of this baobab that it really piqued my interest, because it never occurred to me that I would find tamarind trees growing at the base of baobab trees in the New World, certainly in the Caribbean. And I began to write about this, the intertwining of the two trees in St. Croix, the reasons they grow together, and the names in Jamaica. But at this early date, it was just a curious phenomenon. Why were they given the same name? Why was it so consistent, and so on? Now, just to catch you up on the story, because I'm telling you stories within stories today. This is the tree in Jamaica. This was what it was like when I first saw it. But this tree, unfortunately, was cut down. It started to shed branches. The school was justifiably concerned about the welfare of students. I saw it, and it might not have been my judgment, but I respect institutions and their responsibility. But they replanted a new tree, as you see here, and several other young ones on the campus. And interestingly enough, one of these young trees is growing next to a tamarind trees. And I found baobabs growing next to tamarinds throughout the Caribbean. This is in St. Croix, in central St. Croix, and baobab tree and tamarind tree. This is in the island of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago. You can't see the tamarind, but the foliage is here. This is a baobab tree. And so the question is, how do you explain these similarities. Now, I put the references here for those of you who might be interested in following it up. But my interest really got a drastic boost when Wickens and Dr. Wickens and Lowe published their book on the baobab, and the works of Karen Bell and colleagues on the introduction of the baobab into India. And you can see the trees widespread in India, in Western India, in Gujarat, along the Konkan coast, the Malwa Plateau, which is famous for its baobab population, along the Ganges and the southeastern coast of Kerala and down into Sri Lanka. Southeast coast of Tamil Nadu and down into Sri Lanka, not in Kerala, which is tropical marine, quite wet, humid, not good environment for baobab. And they did genetic studies looking at the connections between Africa and India. And it's an important tree in India. Wickens and Lowe identified it primarily as a tree in religious landscapes, but it's clearly like the tree is used in a wide variety of other ways as well. And the largest tree in India, this is at Golconda Fort on the southeastern part of India. It's larger than any of the oldest trees in the Caribbean, which are, I don't think are above 300, 350 years at the most. And of course, it's protected and much celebrated in India. But what is striking about India is that across the entire subcontinent, the baobab is called a kind of tamarine. And this includes even in the Ganges Valley, where there are other names for the baobab, Kalpavriksha, for example, which is the name of the wish-fulfilling tree of Hindu religious texts. But here you can see in Gujarat, in the Deccan area, in Kerala, everywhere it has tamarind names. Now, coming to the Caribbean, it's the same. And I just found it extraordinary that all across India and all across the Caribbean, this tree is being called a kind of tamarind. Now, when I went to Barbados and spoke to the local community who lived with the baobab tree, they told me it was called flower tamarind. And I remember telling the newspaper reporter who interviewed me about my search for baobab trees, now remember, this is not flower, F-L-O-W-E-R, but flower tamarind. And when they published the article, of course, they published it with F-L-O-W-E-R, flower tamarind, which makes, intuitively, it seems to make more sense, but in fact, it's not accurate because the name flower tamarind is simply a reference to the powdery nature of the baobab's dry fruit, which is one of its really extraordinary properties in terms of long-term storage and the like. So it's called flower tamarind, but not all trees. These are the two oldest baobabs in Barbados. This one we know was planted about the beginning of the 18th century. This one probably slightly before that. This is the Queen's Park baobab in central Bridgetown. This one is the Warren baobab on the outskirts of Bridgetown. And you can see the Queen's Park baobab sheds its fruits before they fully mature. Many people will know this tree because of its central location, but in fact, they don't know the eating of the fruit, since it does not, at least since the time I've been looking at it, does not mature its fruits, which is quite different from the tree at Warren. And this is it's the community that lives with this tree that calls it flower tamarind. And you can see, this is just for you to appreciate that these are not just trees out there in the environment. They're deeply intertwined with life and culture wherever they grow. This is a theater group that mounted a presentation in association with the Queen's Park Savannah baobab. Now, in addition to the flower tamarind of Barbados, we come to the name Guinea tamarind, which is found in St. Croix, St. Eustatius, and Tobago. And these are small islands at the top of the Eastern Caribbean, St. Croix in particular is well known for its extraordinary examples of baobab trees. They're about the same size as the oldest ones in Barbados. And the fruit is much loved by children there. And here in the island of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, you can see the tree growing as part of a home garden, not ideal environment for baobabs, but curiously enough, this tree did have fruit in it. They call it Guinea tamarind. And in Jamaica and the Bahamas and Dominica, it's referred to as monkey tamarind. As far as I know, the tree that existed in Bahamas no longer exists. And the tree in Dominica is still extant. Now, curiously, at the Fort King George Museum in Scarborough, the capital of Tobago, the museum has an exhibit of important fruit pods in the Caribbean, and it lists baobab fruit names, including monkey tamarind and Guinea tamarind and Jamaica tamarind. I have never recorded the name Jamaica tamarind outside of the reference to the Bahamas. Now, my main point to you this morning is that these characteristics, the trees growing in twine, they taste like fruits with overlapping uses and shared tamarind names, their entwinement in the thinking of scholars, and that particular, I should just say a brief word more about that. Their entwinement in the thinking of scholars refers to the fact that they're frequently discussed together, especially in terms of food, nutrition, community development, income, and the like. The overlapping seasonal flowering and complementary seasonal fruit ripening. It's important. The baobab flowers starting in April and through the rainy season, through the summer. The tamarind flowers primarily in the spring and in summer, but they have complementary seasonal fruit ripening, so that the baobab fruits harvest is primarily the end of autumn through the winter dry time, and the tamarind is primarily the end of spring and summer. It's important because not only do these trees serve as, in a way, substitutes for each other in a culinary sense, but this complementary seasonality means that people can extend the harvest and therefore the similar uses of these fruits to ensure their year-round availability. The reports that come from West Africa, it's clear that they never really meet this ideal of having baobab and tamarind fruits and leaves through the year. And the reports are that people often have to resort to purchase or obtaining them from family and so on in order to ensure a year-round supply. The similar fruit morphology in terms of indehiscent fruits and food bribe seed dispersal and human beings are shared specialized dispersant agents. Now, I don't think that all of these things can be explained as a mere coincidence, or that it can simply be a chance resemblance between the taste of these two trees. And in order to make my case, I have been curious about the role of mimicry as a possible explanation for these correlations that I've pointed out to you. The modern view of mimicry has its foundation in the pioneering 1862 research of the English naturalist H.W. Bates, who sought to explain in Darwinian evolutionary terms a deceptive defensive signaling he observed between different species of conspicuously colored Amazonian butterflies. He reasoned that unpalatable butterflies were brightly colored to warn off predators, while palatable butterflies defended themselves by evolving similar warning colors. Following Bates, the history of mimicry studies has given rise to two fundamental set of opposite concepts that are essential for explaining all cases of mimicry in a systematic way. These concepts are the goals of mimicry, identified as defense and advantage, and the means for achieving these goals, identified as signaling and concealment. The four combinations of these sets of opposites are defensive signaling, defensive concealment, advantageous concealment, and advantageous signaling. Although Bates discussed all four basic forms of mimicry, his name became synonymous with false, repelling, defensive signaling, known today as Batesian mimicry. Although early studies focus on the warning colors of insects, the strategy of false repelling signaling is also represented among plants. The many kinds of herbivore deterring resemblances reported in the literature now include plants that have been hypothesized to mimic ants, aphids, caterpillars, spider webs, bird droppings, egg deposits, disease patterns, and thorns. This is the Batesian, just to give you an idea, Batesian false defensive signaling. This is the false defensive signaling as manifested among plants in terms of repelling signaling. Among plants, defensive concealment is represented by stone mimicking seeds and succulent plants, and also succulents that imitate dead leaves and branches among which they grow. This is, of course, familiarly what are referred to as the ice plants of Southern Africa, well known even to people who grow them as houseplants. Advantageous concealment, that is, mimetic resemblances in the form of advantageous concealment and advantageous signaling, are categorized as aggressive mimicry. For animals, advantageous concealment is the stealth strategy of ambush predators. For plants, advantageous concealment is aimed not only at predation, but at competition, a well-known example of which is crop mimicking weeds. So advantageous signaling associated with flower-like insectivorous plants. But the most important area of plant mimicry that is relevant to my discussion is advantageous signaling, not for predation. Predatory advantageous signaling is associated with animals, with the notable exception of insectivorous plants with their false enticing floral traps. Advantageous signaling is common for both plants and animals, but there's a major difference in the goals of mimicry. One of the most widespread forms of plant mimicry is reproductive advantageous signaling in the service of pollination and seed dispersal. According to Barlow and Wines, the best known examples of mimicry in plants involves pollination phenomena. For plants, pollination-based advantageous signaling is especially associated with the evolution of non-rewarding flowers that are similar to the reward-producing flowers of other species. Orchids are the masters of deceptive flowers, including flowers that masquerade as the receptive female counterpart of their pollinating male of the species. Some of the most remarkable expressions of this kind of pollination mimicry are carrion-like flowers that replicate the appearance, texture, and odor of rotten flesh. However, for our purposes, it's noteworthy that the pea family to which the tamarin belongs, and it is the only species of its genus, is also a notable example of a taxa that has produced a number of mimetic species that benefit from dispersal-based advantageous signaling. These are Caesalpinia, we call them Bondic in the Caribbean. They're associated with games found along the shores and representing the colors of These I've collected myself, and they do tend to represent the color of the shore in which I collected them. Below are the seeds of a variety of legumes, Ormosea, Adenanthera, and Abrus cricaturus. And it is to this group, as a member of the pea family, that the tamarind belongs. Now, after Bates, two additional kinds of defensive signalings were described, and they are referred to as Mertensian mimicry and Mullerian mimicry. The fundamental difference between these three historically recognized kinds of predator-deterrent defensive signaling is the extent to which the resemblance between the mimic and the model is false or true. Mullerian mimicry is distinguished from Batesian mimicry by the fact that the Mullerian mimic and model bear a true resemblance to each other. Both are unpalatable. With Mertensian mimicry, the members of a mimicry complex represent a combination of false and true resemblances, since mimic and models are to varying degrees palatable and unpalatable. Distinguishing between defensive and advantageous Mullerian mimicry is important. Classic Mullerian mimicry is a true-for-all predator-repellent defensive signaling that can be classic Mullerian mimicry is a true-for-all predator-repellent defensive signaling that can be characterized as defensive Mullerian mimicry. By comparison, the baobab and tamarind taste resemblance is a true-for-all disperser enticing advantageous signaling that can be characterized as advantageous mimicry. So here is a defensive true-for-all resemblance of a classic Mullerian mimicry. All are presumably equally unpalatable and reinforce the experience of predators. And here I am arguing is the advantageous true-for-all resemblance between the babe and the tamarind. Now, it's always been noted that with Mullerian mimicry, it is not necessary that the identity, the similarity be as exact as we would expect to find in Batesian mimicry, because all patterns of the same type reinforce the same experience from a predator's point of view. I should also say that not only is it not necessary that they taste exactly alike, but it's also the case that from a cultural point of view, people regard the baobab as being the mimic. It's the one that is being called a kind of tamarind. But from my point of view, I suspect it might be the reverse. And I say that because the baobab for human beings is a central place, multi-purpose tree. It's where they meet, it's where they gather, it's where activities take place, and it's where tamarind seeds are being dispersed. But it is not an exclusive relationship. Tamarind seeds are representative of a very weeded tree. They spring up wherever people eat and discard the seeds, and they do that frequently with the tamarind. In the Caribbean, in Brazil, and in other places, tamarinds are used to make a candy called tamarind balls. And you know, the number of seeds can range from 2 or 3 in Jamaica to 5 or 6 in other places where I've tested the fruit and counted the seeds. And so if you take the Caribbean landscape, tamarinds will appear everywhere in addition to in association with baobabs. The other point I would make is that with it is not as strictly important who exactly is the mimic and who is the model, since both tamarinds and baobabs are essentially wild trees, though the baobab is cultivated to some extent. And because they are wild trees people do have to select between preferred varieties that they consider desirable and those that are extremely acidic or bitter. And so in a way, we are still selecting for tasty tamarinds and tasty baobab fruits. And that relationship that I'm describing, I would tend to think of it more as a co-evolving alikeness between baobabs and tamarind. That is sufficiently identical to account for the names and the similar uses and so on, but are also not required to be as identical theoretically as the case is with Bayesian mimicry. Finally, mimicry involving human beings is not a novel idea. The evolution of crop mimicking weeds is an important discussion in theories for the origin of agriculture. And those of you who are interested, I direct your attention to David Rindus's excellent book on the origins of agriculture, A Darwinian Evolutionary View. As an expression of the evolution of crop mimicking weeds is an important discussion in theories of the origins of agriculture. The baobab tamarind resemblance adds to this discussion. The most important difference between crop mimics and baobab tamarind mimicry, however, is that crop mimics are associated with the origin of agriculture some 12,000 years ago, while baobab tamarind tastes alike stretches back to the early history of human beings as an evolving phylogenetic tree of the African savanna landscape. And with that, I end my talk. And I thank you all for those of you who are here. It's a strange experience if you're talking to an audience you can't see and respond to, but I appreciate all of you who tuned in to hear this talk. And I hope that, I know some of it might have been a bit cryptic, but I hope that if you have questions, you will put them forward in our discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rashford. We do have a number of questions. First, what is known about, Barbara, what is known about the fungi or mushrooms that may be associated with a baobab? In the pictures of two baobabs from Bridgetown, it looked like there was a small picture of fungi at the bottom right.
I don't know that it's been studied in Bridgetown, and I do know that, you know, the tree is subject to fungal attacks in Southern Africa, and in some cases it's been catastrophic, but it's not a detail that I've worked on myself, so I can't give a responsible answer there.
From Carol, how old does a tamarind tree have to be to bear fruit? I have a tamarind growing in my apartment for 40 years with no fruits.
I think, you know, 5-10 years, but it's not a tree that's going to bear fruit in your apartment, I'm sorry to say. It doesn't do well under shaded conditions. It really requires full light. And under the proper conditions, it grows very quickly and very luxuriously. It's a very beautiful tree and a very hardy tree. I have family members who have tried to grow them in Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and the tree grows, but even after several years, it just never flowered or developed fruits. So I can't be more specific there. But I might say, though, that even though the baobab is fully tropical, it has been introduced into subtropical regions like Florida, for example. And the trees in Miami do bear fruits, and I have collected the fruits there as well.
Another question, what would you like to see in the future studies of the baobab and tamarind in the Caribbean and elsewhere?
Well, I think, you know, as a person from the Caribbean, it's just very interesting to look at the significance of plants in the landscape of the Caribbean. And I believe there's what one anthropologists refer to as an underlying coherence in what people think about plants in the Caribbean region, whether we're talking about baobab trees or cotton trees or, other species that are widespread in the region. And I always have wanted to make a contribution to getting to know that dimension of Caribbean culture and life, and to do it in a way that would also be beneficial in terms of conservation. Baobab trees, sadly, the oldest ones are dying in Southern Africa, in Madagascar, and it's been attributed to climate change. The images that we see in newspaper articles and in scientific reports are quite sad. These are trees that have been estimated to range in age anywhere from 1,000 years to up to 2,000 years. Those in the Caribbean, which are about 300 to 350 years old, are also under severe threat, because what baobabs require most of all is space. And in that sense, they do run into severe competition from human beings. And every baobab that achieves mature size that I've looked at, there's always a cadre of people who are behaving in a protective way towards it. And that's also a fascinating topic. So encouraging conservation of historically important plants, encouraging the recognition of plants that have important food value. There are some trees that will never become common in the Caribbean unless they're intentionally and systematically planted. Lychee has a wonderful value, but it will not be common unless systematic effort is made. A baobab is the same. It won't grow unless it's carefully planted, unlike the tamarind. And I can think of many others. Mangosteen, for example, which grows in Castleton Botanical Garden. And that is the only tree I've known since I was a child growing up in Jamaica. So there are some trees, some plants that are of great value, but that will require support and education. And there are groups in the Caribbean that engage in that. The Trees That Feed Foundation, I mention them because of their active involvement in tree planting in the region, especially of the breadfruit. And they're also Caribbean Tree Planting Week this year when they planted baobab trees in different islands. And it was interesting to hear young people of the region talk about baobab trees. And I realized that if they don't talk about these trees and if they're not familiar with them, it's very unlikely that they will be able to act in a way that will protect them so that they continue to survive for as long as we know they're capable of surviving.
Thank you. Another question, why does baobab not fruit in the Caribbean? Is there some physiological reason for it?
No, it fruits abundantly in the Caribbean, but the seeds do not spring up naturally from incidentally discarded seeds. I have looked carefully, especially in islands where the children eat the fruit. I have not seen seedlings on the parent tree or in the vicinity of the trees where the children eat the fruit. And I suspect this is probably because in Africa, the fruit is processed for the pulp and large quantities of seeds are discarded in the refuge environment of people's homes. And the studies in West Africa document that this is a favored environment for these seeds to germinate. And they're often transplanted from there into people's household environments or into their farms and fields. What you're referring to, Mike, in my talk is that not all baobab trees fruit. And this is a phenomenon that has also been documented for Africa as well. They produce perfect flowers, but for some reason, some individuals will abort their fruits just as they're beginning to mature. And this is not uncommon in the Caribbean. So You saw in Param, but I've recorded it for Barbados. I've seen it in Tobago. I saw it in the tree in Jamaica that I showed. For example, it flowered profusely, but did not mature its fruits.
Thank you. Next question. In Africa, who, despite humans, disperses baobabs?
Could you repeat the question?
In Africa, who, aside from humans, disperse baobabs?
Baobab seeds have been found in the dung of elephants and some of the ruminants, and but there are those who argue that it's primarily a primate dispersed fruit. It is especially loved by baboons, so much so that even the Hasta people of Tanzania, who are foragers, they will even collect the dung of baboon and wash it to obtain the seeds. And they will pound the seeds with the pulp to make a flour, which is a basic staple of their diet. So it's largely primate dispersed fruits. It's known to be much loved by chimpanzees and by baboons and by other and by monkeys. But yeah, some people have made references to birds, and you know, there are some indications of some birds being able to access the fruit, like parrots and so on, but it's not clear that they are major dispersal agents for baobab trees. My own view is that the baobab is overwhelmingly dispersed by human beings. And this would be true for a good part of Africa. And I suspect it is overwhelmingly dispersed by human beings in India and in the Caribbean.
Thank you. Another question. Given the relative similar structure of the baobab and Caribbean cotton trees, do Caribbean people such as Jamaicans share similar spiritual associations with both the baobab and cotton trees? If yes, what are these beliefs or associations that they share?
The answer is yes. And, you know, once you start down this rabbit hole of mimicry, you come to realize that, you know, people are confusing things all the time, you know. So when I finally switched my interest expanded my interest from cotton trees to baobabs, I found that people kept sending me to cotton trees. But it turns out that they don't readily distinguish cotton trees from baobabs when the trees are young. And even in Brazil, young baobab trees are sometimes referred to by the same name they use for cotton trees. So there is that confusion, especially when the trees are young. What is the significance of both trees? The simplest way for me to explain it is that they're both cosmic trees in the religious and aesthetic views of people of the Caribbean. And this idea of cosmic tree is universal to people. As an anthropologist, I'm perfectly willing to make that statement. All over the world, people are endeared to fig trees. And it's not arbitrary that they feel that way. They see fig trees, especially strangler figs, as beginning their growth in the heavens and descending to earth, so to speak. And they attribute great religious significance to them. Whether we are talking about, you know, figs in India, for example, a Bengali fig, or, you know, the Ficus religiosa, or we're talking about figs among the people of the Americas, or who also value the cotton tree. Sacred trees are important to people, and it's one of the ways in which they model their conception of the cosmos. The Egyptians, for example, with the sycamore, have that same view, the sycamore fig. So the canopy is, in essence, the sky above, the roots of the earth below, the central axis that meets at the surface of the earth and the trunk of the tree. The plane at which people live is the center of the cosmos. And when you explore the religious significance of it, you see why it is of ritual importance to people. Now, in different islands, they pick different trees. In some traditions, the cotton trees remains highly important. In some traditions, it's figs, as in Brazil. But generally, baobab trees also rank as an important cosmic tree in the Caribbean and elsewhere. I might add just one other thing. It's interesting that in India, and I would mention this to the audience, Dr. Ved, who has been studying these two plants, who has been studying baobabs, he's convinced that this is the tree mentioned in the sacred literature of India as the heavenly tree of the Kalpavriksha tree. And this name is especially associated with the baobab and the Ganges, as I pointed out. So wherever baobab trees grow, they tend to attract the attention of people and to acquire inspiration and value. And for those people who have lived with the tree a long time, it clearly has important religious significance.
Thank you. Another question asks, I'm curious to know how baobab and tamarinds dispersed to India from East Africa.
Well, that's a long discussion, and I'll try and give a brief answer. You know, maybe if your audience don't mind, well, no, I won't do that. Yes, let me see if I can put it to you in a straightforward way. There is some idea suggested a long time ago that the baobab could be a native to India. That idea has never been followed up on by researchers as being credible, but I mention it because it's there. There's also the idea that is recently being discussed about oceanic dispersal of baobabs from Africa through the Indian Ocean. And some people have argued that that might also account for how the tree got to Australia. But we know from recent studies done by Australian researchers that they believe, in fact, there might be a human factor in the transport of the tree from Africa to Australia. Much of the early literature, especially during the colonial period, attributed the introduction of the tree to India, to Arabs, to Muslims, African Muslims. And, you know, the recent works of the scholars I cited early on regarding India, they have questioned this because there's no evidence of the tree being of any overwhelming importance to Arabs or to people in the Islamic world, or there's no reason. They say, well, you know, it could have been brought by Africans who were in the service of Arabs and merchants and military contingencies in the region. But I am inclined to, I would suggest to anyone interested in that topic that they read the recent papers that I cited in my talk, because I think they have shifted quite clearly the focus of attention to looking at the actual cultural significance of the tree to the people of India, and to looking at it in the context of African migration to India and the Indian migration to Africa. And when I say migration, I'm talking more broadly to include that ancient trade route that linked Africa, Arabia, the Indus, and Western India. So the current view is that the baobab was introduced to India, has been introduced to India many times, not on a single time, and that it could have been brought early on during trade, but that it is much more likely to have been brought in association with a long history of the movements of people and plants and goods between Africa and the eastern coast, the eastern coast of Africa and the western coast of India.
Thank you. Another question. Sometimes in linguistic ethnobotany, we tend to think in hierarchies. So the name monkey tamarind sounds like baobab is seen as a type or subset of tamarind. In contrast, I really enjoyed your focus on a more equal relationship of entwinement or mimicry. Do you have a sense of whether local people who use these names tend to think of baobab as a type of tamarind or as a connected to tamarind?
They clearly see it as connected to tamarind. But in the naming, the naming clearly points to the fact that it is a tamarind that is familiar and the baobab that is not as familiar. And so the tamarind is being used to name the baobab and gives the impression that, in fact, the baobab is the mimic in this sense. I'm not quite sure. People in the Caribbean, there's no confusion these two fruits. Or, the one place I have not spoken about, and it's relevant to the question that was asked, is what are the trees called in Africa? And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that, because when Wickens and Lowe published their work on Adansonia, they did deal with these questions about baobabs and tamarinds, and they provided many African names for baobab trees, but they were untranslated. And I'd have to say it's a subject that has not been documented and studied. But we do know that in Africa, there is no doubt that they see this similarity as being significant, because there's a Nigerian proverb that says, remember, the baobab is not a tamarind. And that gentle reminder of the difference between appearance and reality, or appearance and essence, clearly points to a more substantial awareness than merely the idea of a vague similarity. And I think this substantial awareness has to do with the similar uses of both fruits. Both are used to make candies, both are used to make drinks, refreshing beverages. And so those similarities are recognized in the Caribbean. In St. Croix, I did encounter people who made beverages from the baobab fruit, and as well as jewelry and other things as well. But it is not, I don't know that there's any conscious effort to explain why they should have similar tastes. I have not encountered any folklore that accounts for why they have similar tastes.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's all the time we have today. If you've missed any part of the event or wish to watch it again, a recording has been saved, and it'll be published in the New York Botanical Garden Lecture Library in the Science section. Thank you for being with us today, and we hope you'll join us for future science webinars. Until next time, please stay well, and goodbye, everyone. And thank you so much, John.
You're welcome.
For just a very interesting, fascinating look at something I certainly have never thought about. And it's just been fascinating to spend this hour with you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much.
And thank all of you who joined us for this session. I appreciate it.